Welcome, everybody. On behalf of ASHTO, I want to thank you all for joining us today for webinar 73. My name is Mike Johnson. I chair the subcommittee on asset management for ASHTO. Today's webinar will highlight 3 states that have recognized the benefits of asset management beyond just pavements and bridges in their TAM. Some states refer to these other assets in their TAMP as ancillary assets. Others refer to them as supplementary assets. But we do know from surveys of the subcommittee that this is a topic area that is very important to many of our subcommittee members. In fact, I think it was the second most requested area to get additional information in a recent survey that we did on the annual state of the practice for asset management. So today's webinar will fit perfectly with the need, hopefully. And today we will be joined by 3 states, Indiana, Utah, and Washington State, who will highlight some of their practices in incorporating additional assets into their transportation asset management plan. So welcome to all of you. And with that, I will turn it over to Anna McLaughlin with ASHTO. Anna?
Thanks, Mike, for kicking us off today. Thanks for being here. Hello, everyone. I'm Anna McLaughlin. I am the Program Director for Transportation Program Management here at ASHTO. And I'm very happy to welcome you to webinar 73 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series sponsored by FHWA and ASHTO. Today's webinar will feature speakers, as Mike said, from 3 state DOTs, Indiana, Utah, and the District of Columbia. We're very excited to have them here to share with us today about expanding their TAMPs to include more asset classes beyond pavement and bridges. We've presented webinars in this series every 2 months going back to 2012 on a variety of topics in asset management. So lots of resources available to you if you visit our website, the TAM portal. It's at tam-portal.com. We'll put a link in the chat. That's tam-portal.com. From here, you can click on events in the main menu to register for any future webinars. You'll also find archives of our previous webinars, so a whole host of them for you to choose from. Links to videos and slides will also be posted from today's webinar there, so you'll have that as a resource as well. The TAM portal is home of the ASHTO Subcommittee on Asset Management. For information on the subcommittee, you can visit the TAM portal, tamportal.com. I'm going to say it a million times so everyone has it in their head, and click on Subcommittee on Asset Management under the Community menu. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics, we would love to hear them. You can put those in the chat or contact us directly. You can contact me directly. And if you have any questions for the presenters during today's webinar, you can submit your comments or your questions through the chat feature here on Zoom. We are going to answer questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but you can submit them throughout the whole thing if you have questions. At the end, we'll invite participants to unmute and share your questions or your perspectives during the group discussion at the end. Until then, we hope that everyone will keep their audio muted, just out of politeness for the presenters, so they're not distracted during their presentation. So if you haven't already, be sure to mute your audio. And before we get started today and kick things off, I really want to, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to FHWA, who is our partner sponsoring this webinar series in asset management. FHWA couldn't be here with us today because of a scheduling conflict, but I did just want to mention their website here where they have additional resources and lots of publications on asset management. And I'm not going to read that link to you because it's in the presentation. You can see that. But again, a big thank you to FHWA for their sponsorship and partnership in this effort. And I'm going to turn it over to Hiana Park of Spy Pond Partners, who's going to review our agenda with us and get us going.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you, Anna. I'm Hiana Park with Spy Pond Partners. The purpose of today's webinar and the webinar series in general, as I think you all know, is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the entire asset management community. For this webinar, the primary learning objectives are to learn about how DOTs are making decisions to add asset classes other than pavements and bridges to their TAMs, highlight the work involved to include various asset classes to TAMPs and the lessons learned from that effort. Feature DOT plans for incorporating additional assets in the 2026 TAMPs. I will introduce our speakers before each presentation, but in brief, they are Louis Feagans from the Indiana DOT, Chris Whipple with the Utah DOT, and Wolde Makonnen from the District of Columbia DOT. Time permitting, we will have an open group discussion at the end. Just another reminder, please submit your comments or questions using the Zoom's chat feature anytime during the webinar. We'll make sure to cover them at the end of the webinar, and we will for sure add the slides and the video for today's webinar on the tam-portal.com site. One final note to our presenters to keep things moving along and on schedule. I may interrupt you to remind you when you have a couple of minutes remaining, but I know you're all seasoned presenters, so I probably won't need to do it. All right, let's move on. We will hear from our first speaker, Louis Feagans. PowerPoint going on? Yes. All right. Louis is the Indiana DOT's Managing Director of System Performance and Transportation Policy. He has over 35 years of transportation experience. During his career, he's worked in asset management, hydraulics, water resources, design scoping, and project management. Louis.
Thank you. Am I sharing?
Yeah, it's coming on.
Okay, fantastic. That's the most nerving part of the presentation, is to make sure you can get the show
Right.
going on. So thank you for inviting me to talk about what Indiana is doing to take our TAMP to the next level. NDOT updated and renewed our TAMP in June 2022. I was excited to get that approval. It's always a stressful time of the year trying to get that everything turned in and get federal highway approval and what we want to do and to make sure it's what they want to do. So we were able to get our approval back in June 2022. So we've got one more year, 18 months to go before we start producing our next TAMP. NDOT was also lucky at about the same time that Federal Highway was coming out with, the asset management plans and the TAMP requirements. Our General Assembly passed House Enrollment Act 1002 and created a 20-year funding plan for all the state and locals. And part of that plan was the development of asset management plans as well. So we had the feds telling us we needed to do an asset management plan, or General Assembly telling us that we needed to do an asset management plan. And to be honest, the agency was really kind of wanting to do an asset plan and really seeing the need to develop an asset management plan. So much that we developed an asset management policy with some of the key items that we really wanted to implement for the agency. So trying to improve, create a 21st century workforce, provide great service, and to develop a life cycle plan for every asset. One of our commissioners at that time was really saying, hey, we do this for our cars, we do this for our homes, the routine maintenance to maintain those assets. Why aren't we doing that for a road or bridges and other assets? So we really took that to heart. And right now, we've got a 20-year plan on how to maintain our roads, our bridges, large culverts, and working on some additional assets that I'll be talking about here in a few minutes. But I think that's one of our keys, of our success and how we're maintaining our roads, bridges, and other assets. As part of this presentation, one of the key things that I kept talking about, thinking about was, why do you want to improve your TAMP? And I think the biggest one is number one, the consistency, the transparency, and make it defensible. I don't know about anybody other states, but we don't get many ribbon cuttings for pipeliners, and we don't get many ribbon cuttings for a thin deck overlay, or putting a new overhead sign up, or an MSE wall. These aren't the exciting projects that a lot of representatives and people want to talk about, but they're the key to our program. They're what make the agency, making sure that we maintain the roads and bridges and culverts and overhead signs. And then, like I said earlier, the 21st century workforce, how do we meet the needs of our younger engineers, our younger technicians? Everybody is, wanting to get rid of paper and wanting to do more stuff electronically. So, we really took that to task to make sure, that we were listening to that. And for all my friends, the bridge and pavement engineers, I want you guys to sit down for this next slide. So it's always a controversial slide for a lot of people, but I know it's hard to believe, but states and definitely NDOT, there's more to transportation than just roads and bridges. So we need to maintain those other assets too. Yes, roads and bridges are the key program for the agency, but those other assets that, that cost money and take time and effort to manage. Once again, I'm pretty confident Indiana is not the only state, but we struggle with our project estimates and our scopes. How do we get those improved so when we start budgeting for the future and budgeting what needs that we need for the future, that we're taking into account all the needs of the agency. So not just roads, not just pavement, not just bridges, but how do we maintain signage, guardrail, ITS, signals, MSE walls, noise walls. So we really wanted to try to look into that aspect of the agency. So as many of you guys know, Federal Highway requires every state to report on the NHS routes. NDOT does report on all of our roads, all of the roads that NDOT maintains. We do not report on all of the local roads. We do report on the local roads that are NHS. But about the same time that the TAMP and House Amendment Act 1002 was coming out, NDOT took a real hard look at what our US routes or NHS routes that we were calling NHS routes, and did they truly meet the requirement of NHS? So we did a major reduction in those routes, both on the state side and the local side. So as you see here, we narrowed it down to about 8, 9 NHS routes for the locals. So that reduced our mileage for NHS routes from where we have over 29,000 lane miles of state routes down about 13,000 miles, and then reduce our NHS routes for local roads to about 150 lane miles. So it's a lot easier to maintain and report on that. In our 2022 TAMP, NDOT did add large culverts to our TAMP. A large culvert for the state of Indiana is any pipe over 48 inches. So we developed a life cycle cost, risk management, and financial planning for those. And NDOT owns around almost 9,000 large culverts, and about 3,300 of those are on our NHS routes. What NDOT's starting to look at now is adding the next level of assets. So definitely maintaining the large culverts, but adding our small pipe culverts, so anything under 48 inches. MSE walls, overhead signs, noise walls, lighting, ADA, so the ramps, push buttons, the ADA items, and then our ITS, signal signs, mobility, traffic mobility assets. So part of truly owning, our 21st century workforce, trying to understand the needs of our agency. One of the things in truly developing that 20-year asset management plan for every asset that we own, we kind of started developing a workflow and how we're going to collect them, B, maintain it, and then C, show the needs of those assets and of our roads and bridges. So one of the things that I'm really proud of is our 20-year plan and our 20-year plan video of our asset website. So we've got our roads and highway map where you can go into our 20-year plan layer, type in any county, type in any road, click on the information, provide that information to the user to determine, hey, what are we going to do on this road? What are we going to do on this culvert? If we're doing a road project, how many pipes are on there? How many culverts on there? Is there any bridges? How many signs and information like that? So all that information is in one location for us. The advantage of doing that centralized 20-year plan is, like I said earlier, one spot for all the information. So it's all the engineers or technicians' fingertips. Every person can develop their own view of what they want to look at and how they want to manage it. It's in ArcGIS, so it's easy to use, easy to get resources to, and you can make maps online and also, still in paper. And you can view over the years, so, you start in 2025 and you can go all the way to 2045, a 20-year asset plan. So if I'm meeting with a mayor or for a great state representative, I to kind of rehab the road, rehabbing every road and every bridge. So that feeds into our virtual van trip. So part of developing, improving scopes and estimates is developing, making sure we truly look at the scoping project of an application of what we're wanting to do on that road. So seeing both the two big assets, but also the next level of assets as well. So you can go in and develop, cost estimates and needs, and what maintenance, culverts, signs, right of way, permits, and utilities and stuff like that. So you can kind of see that virtually from your office, so you can verify your field trip and scope. You can also, you can see the payment condition, the bridge conditions, the culvert conditions, photos of the last inspection, and information like that. So every asset is being developed to have their own roads and highway, GIS level mapping. You can go on, click on that asset and see information of that asset. So like I said, again, condition, photos of it, issues, is there flooding, is there ponding for drainage. On the ITS side of it, you can look at the age, what issues, are we having with that? Is it, what type of lighting is it? Is it still LED? Is it, hydrogen? Is it, what's the latest inspection condition on that? do we have enough lighting? What's the latest report on the lighting on that aspect of it as well? And I'm not sure about anybody else, but one of the challenges is showing this to our leadership team. So one of the things, and we used to call it the commissioner's app, but he didn't like that, so we just call it kind of our road analyzer app. But we've developed an app where all this information can be on a iPhone or a cell phone, or a tablet or anything like that. But you can pull off to the side of the road safely and open up this tool, and it will pull up every information on that road segment. So it will pull up how many culverts do we have. It will pull up pavement condition. It will pull up bridge conditions. It will pull up safety items. Have we had crashes as well? Friction numbers. Whatever the information you would want to know about, it can pull that information up at your fingertips. And so, hey, maintenance was out there 2 weeks ago, and this is what they did crack sealing, or in 3 years we're going to be doing a mill and fill on this road and replacing 5 culverts. You will be able to see that information at at your fingertips. And one of the biggest advantages of that aspect of it is allowing the leader or the person sit down with a mayor, with a county representative, and say, hey, we're going to be in your community in 5 years, 10 years. This is what we're going to be doing. What can we do to work with you as well? So building that connection and that openness. And by having, the next level of assets, we're truly getting the true cost of the project. I always laughed when we were doing a funding project in 2017, or to be honest, in 2016, before the law was passed, was they came to me and said, hey, how much money do we need? So I knew how many miles of road we had and how many bridges, how many large culverts. And so, well, how much money do you need for pipes? And it's like, well, how many pipes do we have? And he said, well, we have between 60 to 120,000. It's like, well, I can't give you an answer. So, it's like you need to break that down a little bit more. So now with this tool and this technology, we're able to go to that next level of roads and bridges and assets to have a better understanding what we're going to do and what we're going. So thank you for allowing me to brag about the state of Indiana and what we're doing and the next level of assets. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end of the next session. So thank you.
Thanks, Louis. And yes, if you have questions for Louis, you can enter it into the chat and we'll take them as they come, or you can mute yourself at the end of the webinar when we have Q&A. All right, so Chris Whipple is our next speaker. Chris is a professional engineer and the state asset manager for the Utah DOT. He's worked in his current role for the past 3 years, prior to which he was a design engineer for 15 years, both with UDOT and as a consultant. Chris is passionate about the collaboration and connections between asset management, performance management, and risk management. Take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Hannah. Louis, thank you. It's always fun to see like what the other states are doing and how you guys are pushing the limits of things. So today, let's see if I can get this to show up too. Hopefully right there. Okay. Is that showing up on your end? Look good? Okay. Yeah, today I want to talk a little bit about some of the assets that we have. I'm glad Louis put in a lot of those slides that helped kind of explain why we want to do that, why we want to go beyond pavements and bridges. Definitely pavements and bridges are an essential part of the financial picture of what we do. And it's looking at how we can optimize the, you know, the rest of the assets. So that's one thing that we've really focused on. See if I can get this up too. There we go. Cool. And okay, so these are UDOT's assets. These are and this is like constantly refined, you know, it's a process that's constantly being refined. It begins with assets classified based on their perceived risk, and then so kind of how we came to where we are now. We have what we call a tier system, so tier 1, 2, and 3. They're primarily performance-based, interval-based, and reactive-based, respectively. And like I said, it's constantly being evaluated and refined as we get more data and as we look at some of the risks they pose, and then how we are able to manage those things. So when we did this initially, it was we sat down with senior leaders, we sat down with asset stewards, we sat down with, you know, kind of a broad spectrum of folks across the department, and we said, what are the things that have the highest risk, right? And that's all the question was asked. And then we also looked at the value of those assets, right? And it was interesting to watch, and you know, I wasn't involved when we initially started this. But it's interesting to see how, you know, if we ask that question, which ones have the highest risk, people instantly go to, you know, bridges. Bridge falls down, everybody's going to be in trouble, right? And as we've refined this system, we've redefined what risk really means, right? And in terms of what's the impact to our values and how frequent is that, or how likely is that to occur? And I think that's kind of the difference. We instantly go to, yes, if a bridge fell down, that would be horrible and it would be bad. But we need to take into account how frequent or how likely that is to occur within the state of Utah. And so the likelihood was very, very low. And so we kept that in there mostly because it has that higher value, the dollar value, right? And so we're starting to redefine what those risks actually look like. That helps us as we look through the rest of the assets. Which assets are we going to add? Which assets do we need to manage differently? And then there's subtle nuances as you kind of go into each one of these assets, because, for example, our culverts, which are listed as a tier 2 asset, they really are one of those things that we have some culverts out there that are much higher priority than others. Some that we manage reactively, and we just wait for something to happen, because if they failed, it really wouldn't have much of an impact on mobility or safety, or even finances. And so those are the things. There's some nuances in each one of these as we manage them. We manage them individually, but then as an entire asset class. So what we did, let's see if I can get this to, there we go. So right now, the ones that we have included in our TAMP are our tier 1 assets. Our waterborne striping and durable markings is also something that we include in our TAMP, our 2022 TAMP. We are planning on adding our tier 2 assets as well. So we will be incorporating a lot of those into our 2026 TAMP. And so that's something that we've already started the process to kind of outline what that looks like. And I guess something that I want to point out, and maybe this isn't the way in every other state. I mean, it sounds like, you know, in Indiana and I think in a lot of states, what's in the TAMP is how those things are, you know, there's a plan associated with those. When I say a plan in terms of how we manage everything, that's what I'm referring to. So we do have a management strategy for all of our assets. We have right around 90 assets that we look at. And so you're just seeing kind of the bigger groups of those assets. We break those down into how they're managed, what kind of data that they need to be collected for those. Not all of these have dedicated funding. In fact, most of them don't have dedicated funding. And so it becomes something that we're trying to optimize. We're trying to find ways to do that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, how we have, I guess, found ways to manage these assets without dedicated funding. And so that's an important part to include here. I've shown this before in previous presentations, but I wanted to bring it up again and again thank MnDOT. Minnesota did a great job of kind of outlining this. This is me taking it and adapting it to Utah. I mentioned a minute ago that we have kind of some nuance as to how we manage each one of our assets. Within each one of those assets, they actually have a management strategy, but this is how we define those asset tiers. And so that top level, that performance tier is what we call tier 1. The interval is those next, 3 and 4 there. Those are managed at our tier 2, and then our lowest level is reactive and minimum maintenance is our tier 3. And so that's how we've kind of defined whether or not they have an inventory, a maintenance cycle. Do we collect condition data on them? Do we apply a long-term performance management strategy? And then are we optimizing those life cycles, through that performance strategy? So that's kind of how we approach some of those things. That is how we have a good balance of what our agency is willing to tolerate in terms of risk. Well, we could go into that, but I won't spend too much time on that one. So, yeah, what I want to talk about primarily, I mean, we've talked about what those assets are, how we've included them. I already pointed out that we don't have dedicated funding for things other than pavement and bridge and some striping. And striping was primarily because of a public perception. They couldn't see a lot of the stripes. And so our legislature allocated a good chunk of money to replace a lot of that striping. And I wouldn't say that's dedicated funding. That was just a one-time infusion. And so a lot of our assets, as we look at how we incorporate them in the plan, primarily how we manage them and how we improve the way that we do things, this is how we develop our asset maturity. This is what we've done with our culvert group. Our culvert group is kind of my poster child of, you don't have any money and we can figure out a way to do that better. We worked very closely with our maintenance group who manages those. We were able to get some grants, both state funds and federal funds, to be able to evaluate better ways to collect and store and manage culvert data. And we've gone through a rating process for that using those same types of grants. But this is really like just high level. Like, this is how we break down how to incorporate those assets, how to improve the maturity of those assets. So what we do is we sit down and we say, what decisions are we actually trying to make? What can we do? In the case of that culverts, we asked, where do we need to make those decisions? We looked at design, we looked at construction in the planning phases of things, maintenance, certainly. And what decisions do you need to make based on the data that we can collect? And that was a real good kind of back and forth where we would ask, I mean, do you really, like, if we got that data, would you actually change the way that you made those decisions? And so we had some good conversations. Then we look at that need for and the level of asset data required, right, to be able to define that. So I went to the asset stewards. I said, is this a performance or condition management strategy? Is it an interval management strategy, or is it a reactive management strategy? And again, there's this back and forth, not necessarily like what you'd like it to be, but what's the realistic level for how we manage that given, the tolerance for risk. And again, I could go into that, but we'll just high level. And then the next thing that we do is we look at what are all the possible resources. What are the ways that we can use, what's out there? We looked at things like, our Bluetooth data collection that we already collect for traffic and safety. We looked at things, we had robot dogs, right? I mean, things that like people brought in and they were trying to show us, and we said, can we test this? Can we try it out? We did a lot of different things to be able to look at all of our options for collecting that data. And then again, falling back on, do you need all of that data? And does it make sense to spend all this money and time and resources when we could get it a different way that would meet the level of decisions that we need? And then we go into those. Based on that, we looked at deterioration rates. We looked at other states. We looked at data that's already been collected. And then we make an initial assumption as to how often we need to inspect, how often do we need to do any kind of work. Some of that data we already had, and there's some of those things that we've already collected, and we were able to say, we have a pretty good idea of how often, these signs, these south-facing signs with this sheeting in these conditions, we looked at snow plowing, right? Like, things like that affect that deterioration rates. And we make some initial assumptions, and then we start to manage some of those according to those assumptions, and then track what it is that we're actually doing. Once you've got a place for that data, like this is another issue that we're dealing with, is it's all over the place. We have data in spreadsheets, we have data on hard drives, we have data in shared drives, we have data in GIS, we have data in really archaic systems. And so it's determining, like, how do we connect all that data, and where are those efficiencies? Where can we utilize that data more effectively? And so that's something that we're still in the process of doing, and I would imagine it's going to be an ongoing process for several years. We looked at the ideal place to gather that data is things in what we call digital delivery. So your design is really the easiest place to gather a lot of that data. And so we've done a lot of work on that front to be able to extract GIS data from our designs, our actual CAD drawings and designs. And so that's what we're doing right now, is defining, once we've defined what type of data we need, can we get most of it from our initial designs? And I think a lot of times we have discussions where it's like, well, we need to go out and collect everything that's out there. Well, some of these assets, in 10 to 20 years, they'll all be replaced. And so if we can start collecting data from its birth certificate, right, in design and construction, then eventually we'll replace almost all of that entire inventory. And so these are just some of the things that we've started doing. Instead of spending, hundreds of millions of dollars to go and collect this data that honestly isn't used yet, we are starting to find ways to do that from its inception. And now we're working on ways to automate that, to optimize it. And then this last bullet is really always the challenge for us. And I don't know if it's just because we're a bunch of engineers and we get real excited to solve a problem, but helping people understand what it's used for. And you saw that with Indiana. Making those tools, making it accessible, helping people understand how it can be used, and having those discussions. So that's one of the big things that we've been doing. I wanted to touch a little bit about how we're structuring our next TAMP, because it is going to be including more of those assets. We really looked. Somebody said this the other day. I can't remember the expression, but our TAMP, it probably gets read by maybe 5 people. It's just a big giant document that's not really easily accessible. And so what we're moving toward is more of like a website equivalent. So the report every 4 years is just that. It's just a snapshot. It's a report to make sure that people know where we're at. But we want to keep this in more of a dynamic, live, interactive format where people can get in, they can see those things in a very structured and accessible way. And so these are how we've kind of outlined our website for our TAMP. So our TAMP becomes more of a living dynamic document, and with a lot more documentation is in terms of, like, where does this come from and as of what date. Those are things that, like, I maybe this is, other DOTs. I'm assuming this happens everywhere else, but I think sometimes we just assume that everything we're seeing is the most up to date and it's all consistent, and we're looking apples to apples. But a lot of times we don't put that. Well, we got the pavement data in December, we got bridge data in August. We got our lighting inventory from 2 years ago when we sent everybody out. And it's helping them understand some of the limitations of what we're reporting. And so this is just kind of that high level, how we've broken that down, and then how we make it more consumable with references and making sure that people can get in there, they can find what they need to quickly. And if they really want to dive into, our giant PDF TAMP, they can. But this is really how we're trying to make it more consumable and more useful. So I think, that was it. And I'm happy to stick around for any questions, but I'll turn the time over to back to Hyena.
All right. Thank you, Chris. All right. Our final presentation is from Wolde Makonnen of the District of Columbia DOT. Wolde leads the development and implementation of the DC TAMP. In addition to the TAMP, Wolde oversees pavement performance for the district. Wolde also oversees the pavement management program, including the planning, design, and implementation of treatments for preservation, minor and major rehabilitation work. He currently manages the pavement subsurface and geotechnical engineering project at DDOT. Before joining the Asset Management Division, Wolde managed the design of various roadway and streetscape projects in DC. He has extensive experience in the design and management of various highway and airfield pavements. Over to you, Wolde.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. You see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to talk about expanded asset classes in DDOT's TAMP. Outline for the presentation, I'm going to talk about briefly about the DDOT TAMP, and then move on to ancillary assets, where I'll talk about the DDOT's 2022 TAMP and the initial efforts in adding other assets in the 2022 TAMPs, and then go into talking about what we're doing and what we plan to do for 2026 and beyond. So starting with the DDOT TAMP, the first DDOT TAMP was initially developed and completed and certified in 2019. As the first TAMP, it mainly met the minimum TAMP requirements that were established at the time. That is, focusing on NHS pavement and bridges, making sure we have, inventory, the condition, life cycle planning, investment strategies, financial planning, risk management, all the requirements needed in the TAMP. Then we updated the TAMP in 2022, and the 2022 TAMP basically also met the TAMP minimum requirements, but it also included additional items like the extreme weather requirements under the bipartisan infrastructure law. The 2022 TAMP also had refined processes where we updated the information from the 2019 TAMP, including life cycle planning. We updated the deterioration rates for our pavement and bridges. And we started looking into adding other assets. And that was when we start looking to add other assets. And that's what I'll probably be talking about for the remainder of the presentation. So talking about other assets here at DDOT, other than pavement and bridges, the major assets managed by DDOT include, sidewalks and curb and gutters. We have approximately 1,500 miles. We have alleys, about 365 miles, tunnels, culverts, retaining walls, overhead sign structures, guardrails, attenuators, green infrastructure, trees, street lights, and traffic signals are some of the major items managed by the DOT. We have other assets as well, like street signs, traffic bollards, flexi posts, pavement marking, parking meters, bike lanes, bus stop islands, also managed by DDOT. So when we started thinking about adding other assets to our TAMP, we looked at what the asset management requirements are and what the TAMPs need would be. So for basic asset management, I kind of divided the requirements into two, where the first part would be the basic for asset management, and then the bottom you will see more items for asset management. So the basic items we identified to perform asset management is basically inventory and condition. We need to have data on inventory and condition. We look at data, how much data we have, how detailed the data is, how old the data is, and how often the data is collected. We also looked at basically any database that the data resides in, and any data or asset management systems for the particular asset. Another important basic item for asset management is, of course, a maintenance program. If we own an asset and we manage assets, there has to be some kind of maintenance program tied to that asset. And that's also related to the work we do to maintain that asset. And it also includes items like past work we completed and any kind of data related to type of work we completed on that asset. And also as part of that maintenance program, we also look at what kind of work plan we have in terms of planning the type of maintenance work we do or how we prioritize the work that we plan. Another item for basic asset management is, of course, financial information. And one of the things we look at is, of course, how much money we spend on the asset and how much money we were able to, how much work we were able to accomplish using that money. So I think inventory, the maintenance program, and financial information would be like the basic items that we need for asset management. But as we're planning to do more on those assets, we start looking at basically data analysis and performance analysis. And that is tied to basically asset performance, target setting, decision trees, and gets into the life cycle planning for that asset and risk management. And looking at the budgets, we look at the budget and investment scenarios and see what kind of outcome we can have using different budget levels. So for the DDAT approach, when we start adding other assets to the TAM, is basically we started with the agency-wide outreach, where we identified the various asset owners within the department, and based on the initial list of assets that we created, we went out and sat down and start having the discussion with the different asset owners. And we did that in order to evaluate the asset for readiness for asset management. So we sit down with the asset owners, gather all the information we can about the asset, and based on the information we gathered, we try to do some kind of gap analysis to identify the asset maturity level. So you can see the table we have on the screen here, which is an example of the initial preliminary sample asset register that we developed, where the first thing we did is identify, pretty much list all the assets we have, and then see if we have existing inventory on each asset. And then we look at, see if we have a GIS layer for the asset, and then get some information on how the asset data is updated or how it's used. And this is basically information that we try to gather from each asset owner. So I'm going to go to DDAT's core infrastructure. Before the recent restructuring here at DDAT, the asset management division managed the inventory, the condition, and maintenance of the core assets here in DDAT. And what we refer to core assets here in DDAT is our pavements, bridges, sidewalks, alleys, tunnels, plus guardrails and attenuators. And at the same time, the asset management division also managed the TAMP. So this made it really easy for us because we were all within the asset management division working on the same team. And it was easy to meet and talk to the specific asset owners to get information on these specific assets that we refer to as core infrastructure. So based on what we did, following the procedures we followed, sitting down with the asset owners, gathering information on the assets, we found out that on these core assets, we have good inventory data on sidewalks, alleys, tunnels, and guardrails. And at the same time, we were able to get good information, good data on the maintenance program, because everything was done within the asset management division, and we were able to get all the information easily. In terms of condition data, there was adequate data, although on assets like sidewalk, alleys, guardrails, attenuators, we don't perform condition survey regularly. They're not performed as frequently as we do them on pavements and bridges, but we still have good data and database that we maintain. For example, for condition data, although we don't collect the condition data regularly, the condition data is usually updated. The condition database is updated whenever work is completed at a location. So if we have a sidewalk that was rated poor, for example, when the repair work is completed, we change the condition of that sidewalk to good. And that was how we were maintaining the condition database. And the condition data was still used to prioritize and plan the work locations. We did not have a lot of deterioration models and life cycle plans for these assets outside pavement and bridges. So we focused on the worst first approach, where we made sure we prioritize sidewalks and alleys that are rated poor. But also, in addition to the worst first approach, the programming also includes reactive maintenance programs to respond to safety issues and service requests. For example, if you have a trip hazard on the sidewalk, and we usually get service requests, we make sure we go and address those issues. The one thing I want to also mention here, over the past 6 to 7 years, there has been significant investment on sidewalks and alleys by Mayor Bowder. And I might be able to provide more explanation on that later on. But I guess sidewalks and alleys were important assets, one of the important assets here in DC. So based on our finding, we kind of identified 3 types of maintenance strategies. One is the condition-based maintenance strategy that focuses on condition and condition data. The other one is the interval-based maintenance that focuses more on routine, regularly scheduled type of maintenance. And the third one is a reactive-based maintenance, which are mostly based on service requests or emergency responses. So when we did our 2022 TAMP, we kind of focused on sidewalks and alleys because, like I said earlier, those 2 assets were also managed by the asset management division, and we had a lot of information in terms of condition, inventory, and maintenance data on those assets. So based on that information, this is a quick snapshot of the sidewalk data we have here in DC. Look at the sidewalk condition based on the latest survey, which was from 2023. And you can see that the year the survey was done before that was 28. So when I was saying, that's what I was saying earlier, where the sidewalk survey is not done as frequently as pavement and bridges. So last one was 2018. The previous one was 2018, and this is the conditions from 2024. And in the chart on the right, you can see how we use the sidewalk information and sidewalk condition data to forecast the next 5, 6, 7 years. And this is a quick example of a sidewalk network forecast we have using approximately $25 million a year budget, and how we can improve the sidewalk network. So asset management assessment we did on sidewalks. We try to identify the maintenance strategy. And like I said earlier, sidewalks are a combination of condition and reactive based maintenance strategy. We looked at 4 processes where we look at inventory, condition, performance assessment, and analysis forecasting. In these areas, in terms of inventory, like I said, we have excellent information, enough information. Condition data, we have adequate data. Performance assessment, we have adequate data. The only issue we have with the sidewalk is being able to develop deterioration rates and more analysis in order to be able to have better forecasting. And that is the one thing we are missing in sidewalks. We have the basic stuff. We have the inventory, we make condition assessments, we try to forecast performance, but one thing that needs to be improved is, deterioration rates and being able to have analysis tools for sidewalk assessment. Similarly, for alleys, this is a snapshot of the alley condition in 2018. So this is the last year of the alley survey that we performed. And you look at how the condition looked like in 2018. And the chart on the right shows a forecast of the alleys over the next 6 to 7 years and how we're able to improve the conditions of the alley. And we kind of estimated approximately $15 million a year to give us the results that's shown in the chart. Similarly, for alleys, we did some kind of management assessment. Alleys mainly use condition-based maintenance strategy. In terms of inventory, condition, and performance assessment, we have good information and good data available. Similar like sidewalks, the only issue we see need improvement is the development of deterioration rates and modeling in order to be able to forecast better performance data. Another asset we looked at are tunnels. And tunnels are also managed under the asset management team. We have good inventory and condition data overall. The tunnels are a little complicated because they consist of various components. There's a combination of condition, interval, and reactive-based approach in terms of maintenance. Similarly, just like sidewalk and alleys, the tunnels require more work in developing life cycle plans and the deterioration rates. Because, like I said earlier, there's various components inside a tunnel. Tunnel have structures, we have mechanical, we have electrical, and other components inside the tunnel. And each component requires its own asset management and maintenance strategy. This is a quick assessment of tunnels. You can see how on the left we have the equipment and all the components inside the tunnel. We have the major structural components for the tunnel, but we also have lighting, ventilation equipment, pumping stations, sensors, fire detection equipment, CCTV, and all kind of equipment inside the tunnel. And each equipment has its own maintenance strategy. Structures, we suggest, they need to be condition-based. Lighting, I think the preferred maintenance approach is reactive-based because, lighting usually there's not much maintenance to do until they go out. That's when we go and fix them. So basically, we did come up with different maintenance strategies for the various components inside the tunnel. And the next thing would be maybe how to combine all of these and then come up with one strategy that that combines all of these for each tunnels. So the next steps is basically what we've done is we have used the inventory, the condition data, and basic work planning, right? But we want to do further analysis as we're trying to develop life cycle plans and deterioration rates. We start looking at the data more closely. We start analyzing the different type of information for each asset, right? So this is an example for sidewalks where we have concrete sidewalks, brick sidewalks, and other kind of materials for sidewalks. So looking at the life cycle plan deterioration rates, we find out that concrete sidewalks and brick sidewalks behave completely different. Concrete sidewalks usually last much longer than brick sidewalks. And we're looking at some brick sidewalks also have issues with bricks coming loose or, bricks having like potholes, trip hazards near tree boxes. So looking at the different materials and assets we have, we're finding out that like some materials have shorter life than others. So this is one example where we have damaged sidewalk because of tree roots. Now we start installing flexi-pave material around tree boxes on the sidewalks. Now we're finding that those flexi-pave materials also have different life. Similarly, we have concrete sidewalks that that's of course much longer than brick sidewalks, and they have a different life cycle plan. And then in alleys, sometimes we find special kind of materials. Some are brick alleys, some are concrete alleys, and we're even now finding green alleys where we have pervious material installed in the alleys. And all of these require different maintenance plan. They have different lifespan and they have different deterioration rates. So as we're looking at the assets and we're getting into the detail of the data, we're finding like different kind of life cycle plan, even for sidewalks, depending on the material. So those are the kind of things we're trying to spend more time analyzing and trying to come up with more accurate and more representative model as we're predicting performance. And so the next steps is like basically as we're implementing the TAMP, of course, general TAMP communication, education is critical. So we're going to require more outreach to our asset owners, and not just asset owners, but everyone in the agency to inform people more about asset management, TAMP, and more like the practice of asset management. And we also plan to do more TAMP asset maturity evaluation, where we're going to spend more time looking at all the different assets, data availability for each asset, and see how much of data analysis we can do, and also learn more about maintenance programs and work plan strategies with the different assets and asset owners. And then eventually we will update our asset registers to have more information on each asset, information on inspection cycle, performance targets, life cycle plan, and all related TAMP items. Technology is important, we know, and we want to be able to leverage on available systems, for better asset management. GIS, is a great tool for us to manage assets. This is powerful, and a lot can be done with GIS. And we'll also be looking at other like asset management systems around. Executive management, of course, they are an important part of TAMP. And we want to make sure all the work that we do with TAMP provides enough information for the executive management in terms of course, asset inventory, the conditions, the needs, so that the executive team can make data-driven decisions and be able to set the priorities. And this is, to conclude, I have a picture of Mayor Bowder. And this was at the budget oversight hearing on streets, sidewalks, and alleys about 5 years ago, where the mayor is actually using one of the charts we developed for the budget hearing. And this was instrumental in actually securing budget for sidewalks and alleys. And one thing I want to add is, of course, resources for, we need resources. We need to identify resource needs with the different assets and asset owners in order to be able to do more in asset management and to do more with the different assets. And that's it for me. Thank you, and be ready to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Wolde. So we appreciate all of the presenters today to share their expertise and experiences. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat feature or just unmute yourself. You can also raise your hand and I can call on you. And I think there have been, I saw that there was a back and forth with Jack Smith and Lewis about reducing their NHS route. And I'm assuming, Jack, you got your question answered, but please, speak up if you have more to ask. I did want to ask all of our presenters where they are in making the decision to add assets to your 2026 TAMPs, and what considerations you are deliberating to make that decision if you haven't made it yet. So maybe we'll start with Lewis.
Thanks. We're still looking at it. I mean, we're definitely keeping the large culverts in. We're looking at like MSC walls and noise walls. A lot of it depends on how comfortable we are with the data and deterioration curves that we're predicting, trying to see if it's worthwhile and how we're going to do it. So still up in the air.
Yeah. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason we went to more of a website based, right? So that we can put all of the assets on there, and then show, how we manage each one of those. Some of them, that's about the extent of the plan. So like things on those lower tiers that are like more reactive and minimum maintenance, we're just going to put on there. That's what we're doing. When you get into like your interval based, it's really just giving some details as to what's in there in our official TAMP that we're going to submit. The plan right now is to put all those tier 1 assets and possibly some of our tier 2 assets. Some of those more interval based type things. And one of the challenges, right? Like as you start creating that TAMP, there's certain requirements that you have to give about each one of those assets, and those lower value kind of interval based assets don't really have anything beyond a management strategy of, we're going to replace them in this interval. And so there isn't a whole lot that you can add to it in terms of, what you're actually doing to improve its performance over time. And so that's kind of the approach we're taking. I think another thing that we're looking at is helping clarify. I mean, assuming that risk and resiliency is still something that's included in it, we've already incorporated it, and so we're going to continue to talk about how we're being more resilient to those natural hazards. Culverts is an easy one for us as we talk about flooding. But also some of our other assets and some of the things that we're doing to improve that resiliency to natural hazards. So just little things that we're adding in there. Like I said, the official TAMP itself, we want to keep it as simple as possible. And then if you want to see more of that detail, or if you want to access management strategies, things like that, you can go more to the website. So that's kind of our approach right now.
So Chris, what you might publish as your printed TAMP may just have your first tier 1 assets. And then is it possible that on your website, you would have your tier 2 and tier 3 assets too, or are they going to be fully synced?
Probably be more, everything's, on the website. And then the nice thing about a website format is you don't have to provide as much information. I think a lot of times in our TAMP, we have a lot of fluff.
Mhm. Mhm.
And just giving you like very strategic information and helping people access it the way they need to. And I guess to answer, Lewis's question, this is technically Patrick's desk, and he just moved to another office. So I'm just sitting in an empty office right now.
All right. Wolde, how about you guys at DDOT?
Like I described earlier, we kind of have two-step process where we talk about the basic for asset management, like which is the inventory, the condition, maintenance program, and then any financial information. So we try to see based on like the list of multiple assets we have to see which ones are like ready for for asset management. And then from the basic, the next one would be, of course, what else can we do? What more can we do? That means like in terms of deterioration modeling, forecasting, and that kind of stuff. And like for the stuff we did, like the sidewalk and alleys, we did the basic stuff. But the next step is to go to the next step of asset management. And like I was saying, we're going to try to do more in life cycle planning and analysis and the small details. But at the same time, we've already, talked to different asset owners where we looked at some other assets with enough data, good inventory, good condition data, and a lot of information on the maintenance work, the budget, where we can start, working on those and including those in the TAMP, and at the same time follow the process we have established, the basic, asset management stuff, and try to see if we can be able to do more with the data, and then use that information again for decision making, prioritization, not just for the division, but at a higher level. So it's a combination of the basic stuff and the advanced stuff that we'll try to do both and share what we have, what we find.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. We have a question from Steve Wilcox. Steve, do you want to just unmute yourself and ask your question verbally?
Yeah, sure. Thank you all. Great presentations, everyone. My question has to do with portfolio analysis or trade-off analysis. It's a lot of traditional ways we've done analysis as we looked at trying to optimize condition within an asset class. But the bigger challenge is like, well, how much should I be spending on culverts versus rail versus signs? The simplest is just how much should I spend in pavements versus bridges, really to get the optimal, whether it's condition or to minimize risk, or what is the most efficient use of the next dollar, or any of those things. Just curious if any of you can speak to how you make those kind of trade-off decisions between asset classes.
I might jump in first, and then so we're still in the infant mode of trying to do that. It's one, I think that's a challenge for everyone. But kind of what we've been doing is we've got dates in the DTIMS model. So we run different analysis on all of our assets, trying to compare, okay, if we spend an extra 50 million here or 50 million there, how does that do on condition ratings? We also, part of our House Enrollment Act 1002, we had to have a special scoring aspect, cost of ownership, safety, mobility, environmental, that we kind of have to analyze as well. We also, look at, we've divided the highways system into three levels. So the interstates, major routes, and then kind of some minor routes. So we kind of do some analysis on that aspect as well. Bridges and culverts is always the biggest challenge because none of us want to make national news, and when a bridge fails, oftentimes you make national news. So we always try to take, kind of have that in the back of our head as well. So But right now, what we're trying to do is, like I said, the DTIMS modeling and running different scenarios on funding, trying to get bridge and road condition and culvert conditions, to the level that we promised in our House Enrollment Act 1002. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Louis.
And
Any other?
I was gonna say in Utah, it's let's see, how much do I want to share? So we just brought on a new software provider. So we have a program management software that looks at all of our projects. The fortunate side to that is all of the vendors that came and presented to us have a risk module or a risk component to it. And so the one that we selected actually has a pretty developed risk module. And so what we're doing on our end is building out the values, the things that we value. So it's primarily risk based. And so we're looking at what are the potential impacts of those values, what's the likelihood, and then we're using that as kind of what we call a needs repository. And so you can capture these risks across the state. So condition is an event. It can also be a future risk, right? As it deteriorates past a certain level, it'll impact financial, possibly mobility and even safety, but primarily financial. And so just as an example, we capture that, we pull it in. It allows us to kind of combine those risks into concepts or projects. And then you can carry it through the system. And so we can see as they perform some of that work, whether it's maintenance or a permit project or an actual construction project, we can look and see what those impacts are, and it brings it back into the system in terms of how it's affecting the entire system and the level of risk that we carry, which is also closely tied to the targets, the performance targets that we set. And so there's this balance of setting those targets. The one thing that we do is we say, well, targets are our expectations, and those measures are what we actually did, right? And it's calculating that difference between those two. And in some cases, it's maybe we need to lower our targets. In some cases, we need to provide more resources so that we can improve the performance, right? And it's really just kind of balancing that out. And so our system is what we've just started to develop, but we've kind of laid the groundwork in terms of how we measure that performance. So we have all the measures in place. We know what the values are. And now we're looking at, what level of data do we need for each one of those to go into this system that we can then carry through the entire life cycle. So that was a quick,
Hey, Chris?
yeah.
Yeah, and another way to look at it, based on what Steve's asking is when you were talking about your culvert management approach and the fact that you had no resources for it, but you still, got resources to study it, it sounds like, and to understand it better. But once you understood it and you presented the kind of the investment needs picture, right, based on a longer term asset approach, did that make the decision makers provide additional resources, whether it came from one of your bigger assets or to take it from something else? That question came into my mind is, did you do something because there was such a compelling picture of, for a little bit of money, we can do this much more?
Interestingly enough, I'd love to say that they turned around and said, "Oh, that's amazing. We should give you this much more money." I think what it actually did is it kind of confirmed that maybe our expectations were a little too high, and which was a reality. We as much as I'd love to say, yeah, we're going to go out and spend all this money on doing more with our ancillary assets. I think what it did is it actually helped people understand what they're comfortable living with. Our walls is another one that we don't track, we don't manage. We have initial, like, where are they and what material, but we really don't do anything beyond that. And I think that, like, from my perspective, that's one thing that I've had to learn in this position is that as much as I would love to do more for all of these assets, like, I have to be comfortable with what our what our legislature is comfortable with, right? And so our biggest effort is to try and communicate that and to help them understand it in more realistic terms. Because when you say, yeah, the smoothness is going to be, 4% less, no one knows what that means, and no one cares about the smoothness of the pavement. But if you start to help them understand that, you're going to have, more potholes, or that's going to reduce the flow of traffic by this much, and then it becomes something that they can understand, and that's kind of where we're at this stage of, can we convey it a little bit different, but then also being comfortable with
Yep.
where those targets are.
Thanks, Chris.
And that's
How
what,
about you,
that
Walden?
was,
Oops.
sorry, real fast. That was one of our challenges with our,
Mhm.
with our TAMP. I mean, the federal highway payment condition scores were so much different than what our politicians and our public expected, that we kind of had to develop an internal state payment condition just to say, look, we know our interstates aren't as good as it shows up based off of our TAMP, and this is truly what we feel. And kind of like Chris had said, an expectation of this is how we're going to manage stuff and bring it down.
Thanks, Louis. We have a few minutes. Walda, do you have any response to the kind of trade-off question that Steve asked?
Yeah, that's the direction we want to go, be able to do trade-off analysis and be able really to compare the, benefits of, spending more or moving money from one asset to another. But right now, our experience is most of the core assets I described have dedicated funding. And, we sometimes, other priorities come, like safety, like, sidewalks are, DC being is urban environment, sidewalks are important, alleys are important, and but that's the direction we want to go, to be able to, compare, like, do a trade-off.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. Hey, let's pull up the final slide. Our next webinar is going to be on April 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic will be life cycle planning. More information will be provided as we get closer to this webinar, and that you'll be able to join us for that. And as always, you can go to tam-portal.com to register for it and to see the information as we firm up the presenters for that event. And if any of you want to suggest a good speaker on the topic, please do not hesitate to send that to Anna McLaughlin or to me. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to our presenters.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.